and their kind of rites of passage can be understood according to those two headings: remembering the story and sacred time and transitions. And remembering the story, there's Pesach or Passover, Shavuot, which is Pentecost, again something that Christians might go, hey, we have that. Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. There's Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av. Now, looking at all these holidays, the top three are major holidays, the bottom three are minor ones. Interestingly enough, most people don't know about Passover, Pentecost, or Tabernacles. They know about Hanukkah. But each one of these remembers a story and history of the Jewish people. Again, you have Pesach, the Passover, where in Egypt, the final plague, killing of the firstborn in all the land of Egypt, the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, were spared because God told them to sacrifice a lamb and spread that lamb's blood over their doorposts, and so be spared the killing of their firstborn, and they were. And so the people remember that story, remember that time through a very particular meal that begins with discussion and talking and retells the story of the Exodus and really talks about how God provides for them. It's a great time where people eat horseradish and egg and shank bones and bitter herbs and harashet and parsley, all to remember the story. So the very meal itself and all these actions and all of these words all help remember the story. It's a fascinating thing to be part of this meal known as a Seder and to learn about it. Now again, this story goes from the Exodus into the reception of the law at Mount Sinai, and that's remembered in Shavuot, in Pentecost. And so they remember when God gave them the law to which they were to ascribe themselves to and to engage with in their lives. Then after that, after they've been brought from Egypt, after they've been given the law, they continued to dwell in the wilderness. And as they dwelt in the wilderness, they dwelt in tents, and their understanding is that God also dwelt with them in a tent, or known as a tabernacle. He dwelt among them. And so in the Feast of Tabernacles, they literally build these tents to remember how they lived in tents in the wilderness and how God was with them as well. Hanukkah, again, as a remembrance of the story, this is outside of the books of the Christian Old Testament, but it's the story of the Maccabees, and they're dealing with Hellenistic rulers and revolts, and how during a revolt they wanted to keep the worship of God alive in the Second Temple, and they had the menorah or the lamps, the lampstand in the place in the temple, and they only had so much oil to light it for so many days, but instead every day the lights continued to shine. And so at Hanukkah they light the lights and they remember God's provision for the continual ritual, the continual connection of relationship, even when the oil wasn't there to light the lights. Purim is another story of Jewish people winning. Okay, Tisha B'Av, this is a story of the Jewish people in a lot of ways losing. This is the remembrance of the Holocaust. Okay, the remembrance of 6 million Jews being killed at the hands of non-Jews who looked down upon them simply because they were Jewish. So if that's a remembrance of defeat, then Purim is a raucous celebration of the Jews winning in the time of Esther. A story again of Esther with the Persian king and a possible Holocaust because of Haman, who's kind of the villain in this story. And Haman is defeated, he's beheaded, and during Purim they eat Hamantaschen, or Haman heads, okay, these little cookies that look like his hats. What his hat looked like in these traditional representations. And they celebrate with drinking and fanfare and costume parties. It's a real fun time for them to let loose and celebrate the victory of the Jews. They also have sacred time and sacred transitions that they note. Abraham Joshua Heschel notes that the Sabbath, the most important religious observance of the Jews, one that happens every week, is a palace built in time, is a temple built into every single week. And so if we had the temple to go to at these high feasts during Passover and during Shavuot and during Sukkot, then God has provided for us a palace, a temple, each and every week in the Sabbath. Sabbath is a high time to stop, to rest, to cease work, as God did on the seventh day of creation. They signify the beginning of Shabbat on Friday evening, ending on Saturday evening with the lighting and extinguishing of lights. There's prescriptions as to what you are to do and what you aren't to do. But basically, around Shabbat, families gather together in the home. They slow down their work. They stop their work. They gather together over a meal with wine and with bread and with prayers and with lights, and they remember that God has created them, and they are created not only for work but also for rest. And so they hope to rest from their work and also in the ensuing week to work from their rest. There's also Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and shortly thereafter Yom Kippur, both very much times of rededication, of atonement, remembering that their sins are forgiven and that they are returned from exile because of God, and so recommitting to that relationship. Bar and bat mitzvahs mark the time in young Jewish men and women's lives where they learn to read the Torah, where they become part of the Jewish community in a major way. They remember not only their circumcision, but also the fact that they are part of this people, and this is a major time of transition. There are also particularly Jewish ways of mourning and weddings. You might be familiar with Mazel Tov, being announced during Jewish weddings, again, to find happiness in your wedding. This is sacred time and sacred transitions for the Jewish people. Now, although the Jews are not mighty in number, there's only 14 million Jews worldwide. Their influence is far beyond their meager numbers. In Thomas Cahill, in his book, The Gifts of the Jews, fascinating read, talks about how the Jews made contributions to philosophy and politics and economics and culture and religion so many years ago, and they continue to today. Prothero talks about this, how they've just got really an imbalanced amount of influence in these areas for the number of people that they have in the world. And so Jews, although small in number, are very influential and active in the world of politics and economics and philosophy and culture and education and all these things. We get that a little bit more here in America, but you see that also in a lot of ways worldwide because of the very Jewish influence on both Islam and Christianity as well. The concepts, three concepts I just want to point to. The ideas of monotheism, very Jewish idea, okay, way back when in the Middle East, this idea that there's one God, okay, very revolutionary at the time. The understanding of destiny and time. A lot of the world and a lot of the world in the Middle East during the time of the patriarchs was circular in its reasoning of time and its thinking about time. It was things of cycles, and all that's still there in Judaism. Abraham had this understanding of destiny, that there was something you were meant for, not just something you were meant to repeat, but something that was meant to happen in the future and that you lived for it. And part of that also is the idea of vocation and jobs and living with a purpose. Okay, so again, just those basic ideas that we have about the world, very much Jewish in a lot of ways. Now, we talk about their numbers. If you look at this, you look at the worldwide percentage of adherents by religion worldwide from about 2005. Jews are way down the list in that green, kind of middle down the side column there. 0.23% of the world, a very small slice of the population there as compared to, say, the Muslim or the Christian slice there in the blue and red on the other side of the diagram. As they spread out through the world, in the Jewish diaspora and the Jewish people in the world, most of them are in Israel or in North America. Okay, you've got a sizable population in Europe and the former Soviet Union. You've also got some numbers in Latin America and even smaller numbers in Asia and Oceania and Africa. Okay, but again, Israel and North America, the two big places. You see that pretty clearly here in this map again. So you've got some really strong numbers, the red being the strongest numbers in places like Israel, obviously the small red in the Middle East there, United States, Canada, Russia, France and Germany, the UK. You also see it in Brazil and in Argentina. But you see small numbers in places like Australia and South Africa and Spain, even smaller numbers in places like Chile or in places like Ethiopia. You also see even smaller numbers getting into India and other Soviet blocs, Greece. You see even smaller numbers in the yellows there in a few different countries. This kind of shows that there's a lot of Jews. Almost seems like there's a lot of Jews in a lot of these countries. I think this map is a little better in terms of showing the differences in percentage. Again, the dark purple is 80.5% of the population. That is Israel alone. Everything else, even North America and France, is but 1 to 2% of the population. So while there may be more Jews in the United States than there are in Israel, as a percentage of the population, there is a major difference. That's even more markedly shown here in the lighter purples. That's less than 1%. The pinks, less than 0.5%, and any other